Welcome, everyone, to the Tiny Fit Diva podcast. I'm so happy to have you on another episode. My name is Kylene Terhune, and I'm your host and functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. It's my job to help you uncover the hidden causes of chronic illness so that you can achieve optimum health. And today, I'm super excited to welcome Stephanie Gray. So thank you, Stephanie, so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to give a short introduction so people know a little bit about your background, what we're going to talk about today. Dr. Stephanie Gray is the author of the best-selling book, Your Longevity Blueprint, and the owner of the Integrative Health and Hormone Clinic in Hiawatha, Iowa, where she practices. She is arguably one of the Midwest's most credentialed female healthcare providers, combining many certifications and trainings. In her book, Your Longevity Blueprint, Stephanie shares the most progressive functional medicine testing options currently available, as well as Your Longevity Blueprint nutraceutical products. From gut to hormone health, optimizing your nutritional status to your genetics, and even detoxing the body, Stephanie is excited to share her expertise with the world. And I'm excited to have you because everything in that intro is stuff that we love to talk about on the podcast. Gut health and hormone health and detox and epigenetics and all that fun stuff. So thank you so much for being here. Before we really kind of dive into hormones and all that fun stuff, can you share a little bit about your story? Like, what's your background? What kind of got you really interested in these topics? What drove you to write the book?
Well, that's a long answer, but I'll try to make it short. So I live in Iowa, and I grew up in what I consider to be a pretty healthy family. We went to the chiropractor. My parents were self-employed, so we had a very high deductible, so they tried to keep us very healthy. We always took vitamins. We were exercising heavily, engaged in sports and whatnot. So I felt like I was pretty healthy, and for the most part it was. I went to grad school at University of Iowa, and I started my practice pretty quickly out of school. So I had a lot of stress, and, my story primarily starts with me not understanding or being in tune with my body, knowing how stressed out I really was. So I continued on through grad school several times while working full-time building my practice, and I just kind of thought, well, I can handle this. Thinking that I was doing okay. And when I was a little over 30, sitting at my desk one day, my heart rate took off really fast. So not just with palpitations, but I had the medical terms called tachycardia, very fast heart rate episodes. And I was pretty scared. I was short of breath. I was dizzy. I walked down the hallway at my clinic to, see my nurse. I was so disoriented. I didn't know how to use the intercom. I was kind of freaking out. And she said I looked very pale, looked like I was going to pass out. And so long story short, I ended up in the emergency room and was diagnosed with tachycardia. I ended up seeing cardiology, of course. And I had a full workup at Mayo Clinic. And, the general recommendation was to take a medication to control my heart rate. And that's really the solution that conventional medicine offers many individuals. So I like the analogy that conventional medicine is the fire department. They're here to put out fires, but they have two tools, drugs and surgery. And that's what they were offering me, drugs essentially. And I knew that taking a medication to control my heart rate wasn't going to tell me why this was happening to me. And so obviously I was already practicing functional medicine, so I was blessed enough to have some of that knowledge. But around the same time at my practice, my husband, who's our office manager, he said, we really need to clarify what we offer here because we do so much. And so I kind of took the opportunity, since I was empathizing with patients, I was pretty desperate, with my health, to create this blueprint. And that's why I wrote the book, to clarify our message, all of what we do here to help patients get to their root cause of the problem. And through the book, I weave my personal story as far as how I figured out what the root causes of my problem really were. And my main trigger was stress. Stress is your biggest hormone hijacker. So yeah. That's maybe the medium short version of my story.
No, that's awesome. So I think that it's so great because so many people that come on the podcast, we end up talking about stress, and it's so important because it's very, very easy to just completely ignore. I mean, we live in a society where, running to Starbucks at 3 p.m. is almost glorified as, I'm getting so much done and I have to stay on this high level, and I have to ignore all the physical symptoms that my body is telling me to slow down because it's just not part of our culture, the concept of, taking a nap in the afternoon or, getting to bed a little early. That's not cool, but staying up late, on your laptop and being productive, quote unquote productive, right, is, cool. And so I love that that's such a theme throughout, because it's so important to remind people that that's actually like the underlying cause to many, many, many chronic health conditions, or if anything else, it's at least a trigger for many.
Right.
And
right.
So can you talk about, like, before we hit that wall, before we really get to that breaking point, maybe what are some of the signs that we need to look for before you hit tachycardia and have to, are faced with dramatic life changes or medication?
Sure.
What are some things maybe that your body was telling you ahead of time that we can listen for?
So me personally, or just symptoms in general of stress?
Both. Let's do you personally. Did you notice anything that you were sort of ignoring?
So I had a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms actually also. So part of my story is that I ended up having small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And I also had, I believe I was on my way to celiac. My celiac testing was positive. My biopsy ended up being negative, but bottom line is I'm never going to eat gluten again, right? Because I don't want my gluten sensitivity to turn into full-blown autoimmune disease. So I hadn't tied those together, the gastrointestinal, symptoms, to my cardiac symptoms, but they did go hand in hand. So for me, I had tremendous belching or burping, almost problem swallowing. So my muscles in my neck and my throat were very tight. Some people get tight neck and back muscles leading to headaches. I never had that, but I did have a tremendous amount of tightness and fullness through here. And even to this day, that's one of my symptoms I kind of notice when I'm getting more stressed. Oh, need to breathe here, having some problems swallowing, stress can manifest differently, obviously in different organ systems and different individuals. So those were some of the symptoms for me. Obviously, I had been having palpitations preceding the tachycardia episodes, but I didn't think much of them at the time. I thought maybe I was over-exercising, which I probably was, because it's common after exercise, to sit down when you're resting to then have some palpitations. So I really learned my lesson. I learned that yoga, deep breathing, and calming activities were what I needed. I was already jacked up. I had a busy practice. I was, going all day. So the last thing I needed to do was get home from work and go running. I needed to do yoga and have mental downtime.
Yeah.
But those symptoms can manifest differently in different people. So some patients get more anxiety or restlessness. Some can't shut their mind off at night, or they wake up in the middle of the night. So sometimes those can be symptoms. There can be behavioral symptoms of stress. So I talk to patients about various addictive behaviors. If they're compulsively gambling or shopping or overusing alcohol or smoking, whatnot, those can be symptoms of stress, right? Because that's their unsafe coping mechanism.
Yeah.
Some of my patients, because they're of the menopausal age, the more stress they get, the more emotional they get as well. So I like to just pay attention to that with my patients. If they come in and they're just crying, that's a symptom of stress. And then with a lot of my patients, it's brain fog. They have so much going on that they're constantly worrying or whatnot. They've just lost the ability to really concentrate and focus, sometimes even to find joy in life. That maybe their talent and their creativity or their humor is gone because their body's so stressed out. So symptoms can be emotional, cognitive, or behavioral or physical. But if the root cause is stress, you've got to master and get rid of the stress.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And you hit on it too, because you realized that you needed to do yoga, you needed to do deep breathing. And again, that's not cool, right? CrossFit is cool, and running marathons is cool. And we're so focused on these idealistic things that we want to be, or our best friend is a marathon runner, right? And she can handle 2 kids and all this kind of stuff, and her life is great. So I want to be able to do that. And I feel like my body should be able to do that. When in reality, that, genetically, environmentally, depending on what's going on in your life, who you are, like that could completely be the wrong exercise for you. And, I think there's a lot of resistance towards deep breathing and meditation. And, it's hard. It's actually, I think it's very difficult for us in our fast-paced society to sort of stop and do that for ourselves. So I always think, I always tell everybody about this headband that my husband got me. It's called the Muse headband. It's a biofeedback headband. Yeah, it's super cool. And if you're like totally ADD, that's a fun way to do it because it, plays birds chirping if you're calm. So it's really great. It kind of makes it fun. So if you need a game, but what are some things that you found in terms of stress relief that you were able to incorporate for yourself besides yoga? I mean, do you do like any specific deep breathing techniques or?
So funny you mentioned CrossFit because I had been doing CrossFit for years. I'm a former gymnast, so I'm just used to, intense activity. And I felt like, if I don't do this intense physical activity, I'm not going to lose weight for my wedding. And, my body almost had adapted to requiring, I felt like, more intense stress for results. And I thought that I was wrong. I did CrossFit for too long. And so I really totally reshifted my exercise routine. And I also really needed to literally put it on my schedule that I was going to not go home, turn on my computer and keep working. I had to set boundaries, which was really tough for me because, I want to serve my patients. And when I have a pile of questions that, patients want me to get back to them on, I want to get back to them in a timely manner. But I had to ask for help to delegate more at my practice. I had to cut back on my workload. So my husband said, this is how many patients you're seeing per day. And that's it, because we've got to calm your body down.
That's a good husband.
Yeah. And regarding the deep breathing, interestingly, this was even recently. So during the time of the most intense stress, I would put a sticky note on my door over lunch and just say, I'm trying to deep breathe, leave me alone, for 5-10 minutes. And I'd tell my patients that 5 to 10 minutes a day is better than 40 minutes once a week. So it's better to every single day try to do something. And now, obviously I'm working that time up, but at that time, that's what I was trying to do over lunch was meditate, deep breathe, turn on some calming music on my computer. But recently, I've even more found the benefit of deep breathing. So I speak at some conferences on hormones or, various health topics. And I usually get a little nervous before I get up on stage. I like doing it, but it's natural to be a little nervous, right? And at this conference, I just kind of walked up there and did my talk. And afterwards, I thought, wow, I wasn't even nervous. And then I reflected on the morning and they actually had us deep breathe 3 times that day. And so to me, that was such proof of how I had underestimated how significant deep breathing had on calming my nervous system to prepare me for that presentation. And so that made me a strong believer. And so now I think I try to incorporate that even more, and I'm preaching it in a more strong fashion to my patients because I feel that it's so important.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to use that because I'm going to be speaking more at like the end of this year and into 2019. And I used to, what I went to school for was opera actually. So I don't have an issue. I know. So it's totally different than what I do now, but I don't have an issue performing or getting on stage or anything, but I still do get nervous. Like I love it. I love doing it. But there's this aspect of the, the anxiety before you actually get up, right? And so I'm going to have to use that tool. Deep breathe 3 times before. That's awesome. So let's talk about your book a little bit. The very first chapter I love, it's called Your Foundation, Restoring Gut Health, which is so fantastic because through everything that I've learned and studied, I really began to believe that the foundation truly is in your gut because there's just so many underlying things. Your stress can affect your gut, and your gut then affects your brain and your hormones and your energy levels and everything else. And so can you talk a little bit about that connection and how stress affects your gut, and then in turn, we're going to get into hormones, so then in turn maybe how it affects your hormones.
Sure. Maybe if you don't mind, I might back up just to introduce the concept of the book so the audience understands that. So throughout the book, I was trying to simplify, to kind of just create an analogy, right? We maintain our homes. We don't even realize it. We're mowing the lawn. We make time for that, right? We want our lawn to look good. We keep hair out of our drains. We're changing the filters, our furnace filters on a quarterly basis. But we don't always incorporate things like deep breathing, right? Maintenance techniques to help repair and rebuild our body. And so what I was trying to convey to the audience is there's hope. You can regain health, but we've got to rebuild your health using similar concepts. And so I was trying to compare the body to your home. And so within chapter one, I'm comparing the foundation of the home and how strong it has to be for the house to stand, right? Without a strong foundation, the house is going to crumble. And the same is true for your health. If you don't have a strong gastrointestinal system, which I'm saying is the foundation of health, you're not going to be able to build good health upon that. So even with me, every time I had gluten, I would have short episodes of tachycardia. So after eating it, I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, really fast heartbeats, and eventually my heart would calm down. But it's kind of scary when that's happening. And so oftentimes patients think, well, I don't need to work on my gut health because I don't have gut symptoms. But that's just not the case. If we think of a term that many are now familiar with, leaky gut or intestinal permeability, symptoms of that can manifest in different body systems. So for me, that heart symptom was actually a manifestation of what was happening in my gut, which clearly my cardiologist wasn't asking me what I was eating or trying to get to the root cause of the problem. So the origin of many symptoms, whether they're respiratory, whether they're neurologic, musculoskeletal, many times origin is similar. The root cause of the problem is inflammation in the gut. So when you're stressed, your immune system is more compromised, so you're not going to be able to fight off infections. Things like yeast overgrowth can happen. I mean, really, if we come back to the basics in the book, which I divide chapter 1 into kind of section A and B, A is all about how foods can compromise that lining, can cause the leaky gut. But then part B is how gastrointestinal infections can also contribute. With me, obviously, I had the SIBO, but many patients may have yeast overgrowth or parasites or other bacterial issues. So stress is, trying to tie this back into stress, stress is not a good thing to have, but what stress is going to do, it's going to increase your risk for food sensitivities and increase your risk for gastrointestinal infections, which impair your foundation upon which to build good health. So you really don't want to have either.
Yeah, it's like the perfect storm because it can affect your good and bad bacterial balances.
Yep.
I mean, it was so crazy when you start looking into stress. It's like how even the things you think or how you perceive your environment, it doesn't even necessarily have to be real. It's just how we perceive things, and then our body internalizes it, and then all of a sudden you're more susceptible, and like you were saying, your immune system becomes suppressed, and then boom, you have food sensitivities, which leads you to be more susceptible to pathogenic overload, which creates a perfect environment for more food sensitivities. It's like you have this perfect storm that just then literally feeds itself to keep going and getting worse unless you identify and check it. And then
every time we're like feeding off each other here, but things I want to tell you based on what you just said. At the same conference I was referring to, one of the speakers talked about obviously the strength of having a positive mindset. And that's one thing, for reducing stress is, an attitude of gratitude and being thankful and positive affirmations and whatnot. But she gave some examples of how strong the placebo effect is, as meaning how strong what we think is, our mind can have on our physical symptoms. So 2 specific examples she mentioned, which I've got to get the reference for these because I want to use these also. But one was that they took some children, 10 children outside, and the children were prone to poison ivy. So they took half the kids and they told them they were giving them basically poison ivy, exposing them to the rash, even though they weren't. But because they told the kids this is poison ivy, most of them developed the rash. And then opposite, the kids that were exposed to poison ivy, they told they were not, and they did not manifest with the rash. Wow. And that was crazy. She mentioned another study of patients who were told they were given chemotherapy, that they would lose, how do I say this? So the cohort of patient was divided into patients who got chemo and who didn't get chemo. And typically with chemo, you would lose your hair, right? But that cohort of patients, they said, we were not giving you chemo, and they didn't lose their hair. The cohort of patients that actually did get chemo, they told them they weren't getting it, and they didn't lose their hair. So the opposite, I said that right, hopefully I didn't mess that up, but the opposite of what was predicted happened because of the power of the mind. That's
amazing.
crazy. Yeah.
It is. You think it's so woo-woo to do affirmations and to picture your life in 5 years and to tell yourself that you're getting better and you're on this healing journey, but it's not. I mean, it physically is internalized and helps you get well. It's so funny that you say that because my husband, yeah, because we've gone on some different protocols and stuff. I've run stool tests on him and all that fun stuff. And, he'll just go through it. No problem. He has the best attitude in the world. And he's like, I'm healed. I'm better. And then
That's helpful.
it is. And then sure enough, we'll get his results back and we're like, man, you are like super fast, right? In terms of your physical response to healing. Like he's just like, yeah, because I just believe it and I'm done and I'm just a badass.
Love him. That's great.
I'm like, we all need that mentality when it comes to our health. Okay, I identified this. I'm going to heal. It's going to take me 30 days and then I'll help you out. That's so cool. So can you talk a little bit about how that affects your hormones? So how does gut health then impact your ability to produce, regulate, maintain a healthy hormone status?
Sure. So any stress on the body, so not just food sensitivities or, gut health, but any stress on the body can compromise our body's ability to produce hormones. So if you have food sensitivities, so let's say you're eating gluten, we'll give a basic example. If you're eating gluten when you shouldn't be, that's a stress on the body. So not only can that cause inflammation and other symptoms, but that ultimately, for many reasons, can, again, compromise your body's ability to produce hormones. Now, I'll kind of go in a little bit to maldigestion and nutritional deficiencies too. So if you have celiac disease, obviously that's full-blown autoimmune, disease where you're never supposed to have gluten again because the microvilli lining your gut have worn down to the point where you can't absorb nutrients. But that malabsorption and inflammation can still happen with food sensitivities. And so the more inflammation in the gut, that can alter the bacteria, which you referred to earlier. And then I just tell patients, you're not getting from your foods what you should be. If you're not digesting and absorbing your food appropriately, you're more likely to be nutritionally deficient. And those nutrients are needed to support hormone production. So not only, are having food sensitivities or poor gut health, not only can that be a stress on the gut, it can compromise our absorption of nutrients, which then leads us nutritionally deficient, unable to have the building blocks we need to make hormones. Kind of the simple way to explain it.
Yeah, no, that's very clear, and I think that helps a lot to explain why it's important. Because a lot of times we're like, I'll just eat what I want. It makes me a little gassy, and it's like, well, it can have this downstream effect that we're not really thinking about.
Yep.
For sure. So in chapter 6 of your book, you dive into hormones and you break them up and you talk specifically about, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So you talk a little bit about those and why is it important, first of all, that we have a certain amount of them, but then can you talk maybe about the ratios between them as well and why that's important?
Sure. I think I'm following. So should we talk about the importance of each of the hormones?
Yeah.
So at all ages, for men and women, we want to have appropriate levels of cortisol, right? We don't want our cortisol to be too high, like mine was, or for athletes who are over-exercising, their cortisol is too high usually. We don't want it to be too low either. Cortisol is great for when we think of metabolism and energy and mental focus, whatnot. So there's a fine balance of where we want cortisol to be. Thyroid hormones, same thing. You don't want to be too low or too high. And with my patients, when we draw labs, I draw a bell-shaped curve for them, and then I plot their labs. So I say, you're only at the 4th percentile for thyroid function, or you're at the 99th percentile or whatnot, so that they can actually see not just that they're in the normal range, quote unquote, but that they're optimal or not optimal. So thyroid hormones, not just T4, but T3 is very important when we think of metabolism again, and energy and concentration. We have to have appropriate thyroid hormones for good circulation and bowel movements, for your hair to grow well, energy again. So you want to have optimal, not low, but optimal levels of thyroid hormones. And then when we think of the sex hormones that the ovaries produce in women, at least, we look at estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And then in men, basically, we look at the estrogen and the testosterone and sometimes DHT. So estrogen is extremely important, especially when it comes menopausal time. The lower your estrogen is, unfortunately, increased risk of dementia. So, and that's why a lot of menopausal women have a lot of brain fog. They walk into a room and they forget why they're there because their estrogen levels have been declining. Estrogen is important for vaginal dryness, for hot flashes, night sweats. Also really important for bone density. In the younger women, obviously important for fertility. It causes the uterine lining to thicken. And then progesterone, you want to have a great ratio of the, kind of referring to that question, a ratio of progesterone to estrogen. You don't want to be estrogen dominant and have too much estrogen, or you can have very heavy bleeding. You want to have enough progesterone on board to protect you against the heavy bleeding. So progesterone is my favorite hormone because it's calming and soothing. It's great for sleep and PMS, anxiety, whatnot. So oftentimes we give that to women to help them sleep rather than sleeping pills, whatnot. It's very important for fertility. And then testosterone helps with mood, motivation, drive, libido, energy. And I should mention progesterone and testosterone both help with bone density also. So a lot of men go through andropause and they lose their confidence, their muscle mass, they're gaining weight. You know, men experience hormone-related age decline or age-related hormone decline also. And so in both women and men, we want to make sure we've tested their levels to see where they're at, see if they're optimal, and if not, work to improve them. And usually it improves quality of life significantly.
So are there different ways that men and women as they age can be preventing excessive loss? I mean, I know it declines naturally as we age, just as a normal function, but we want to make sure that it doesn't decline too much, that we then have all these symptoms and these issues. So are there some natural things that we can do to sort of maintain optimal balance as we age?
Yes, you bet. And I do want to say it's really important for, I would love it if all my patients had their hormone levels tested in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, so that we could track subtle changes. Because maybe a man's testosterone levels declining, he doesn't really feel terrible until he's very low, and then he feels lousy. So it'd be nice to intervene, sooner. And if we could assess and know that it's, time to intervene. So getting the levels tested is very important. But on my website, yourlongevityblueprint.com, I do have a free PDF, and it walks the audience or viewers through 3 tips to boost hormones naturally. So those 3 tips we've already focused on a little bit. So one is to reduce stress. So the earlier in life we can learn and master this, the better. So we don't crash and burn, right? And then have to recover from that. So that's one thing we can certainly be aware of as we age, the importance of keeping stress levels low. And then we talked a little bit about fixing nutritional deficiencies. So improving gut health, indirectly improves nutritional deficiencies. But our food sources are so nutritionally, they're just not as nutritionally dense as they used to be. Even USDA agricultural figures will show that, that our soil is deficient and it's producing foods that are deficient. And so I am an advocate for supplementation. So we want to fix nutritional deficiencies to help your body have what it needs to make hormones. So just taking a high quality multivitamin is important. Making sure you're getting selenium and zinc and vitamin D and magnesium is very important. And even omega-3s. Healthy fats are what, make cholesterol. That's where your hormones come from. So you don't want to have too low of cholesterol levels either. And so many times we can test patients to see which nutrients they're low in. But if you don't have access to a test, really just thinking about eating as healthy as possible, real foods, not processed foods, and supplementing can help to boost hormones naturally. And then the third thing that we haven't dove into yet is more removing toxins. And so I think our generation has been overburdened with toxins for various reasons. One, they're in our foods, right? Herbicides and pesticides, all the GMOs. 2, even with electromagnetic chaos, even us sitting by our computers here, that the electromagnetic stress isn't helpful to us either. So really working to clean up our lives. There are where's my phone? There are various devices, like I have a case to block the electromagnetic frequency on my phone. There are some steps that we can take to minimize some of those effects. We can choose to eat organic, choose to eat more cleanly, and then really think about our personal care products. Are we putting parabens and phthalates and sulfites and all these endocrine disrupting chemicals all over our skin? We need to think about our lotions and conditioners and deodorant and makeup and everything, even shaving cream for men. Really thinking about if our products are safe or not. The Environmental Working Group has a website, the Skin Deep database. There's a free app on your phone as well you can use. So I have patients start reducing their toxin exposure by cleaning up their life, eating cleaner and getting the toxins out. Many of our patients will put through, and you probably do this too, through a liver detox program to help further kind of purge their body of toxins. But in a nutshell, those are the 3 points: reducing stress, fixing nutritional deficiencies, and then reducing your toxin exposure. There are 3 things we can all be doing to help boost our hormones as we age.
That's so awesome, because people can take action on that now.
Yeah.
They can absolutely listen to this podcast and say, oh, I can do that. I can make these changes. So I'm glad you brought up the 3rd point, because I did actually have that written down. I wanted to ask you about liver and detoxification and how important that is. So we're talking about toxic load, and we've talked about that a little bit on the show as well, in terms of what you were just talking about, skincare. And that can be such a process for people. And there's so many resources out there, though, like you did mention several. And but I want to encourage people, like, it doesn't have to be an overnight thing. Just make it a goal, and maybe start with your hair care. And then once you kind of get on board with that, maybe you move to your foundation. You find the right foundation. And then maybe once you move from that, you move on to mascara. Just do one thing at a time. And then you're lessening that burden. And then maybe you move on to your home cleaning products. I know for me, it's been several years of slowly trying to figure out, like, what works, what doesn't work with my skin, with my body, like what's effective but still non-toxic and all that fun stuff. But so eliminating, obviously, the external load as much as we possibly can, but we still have, so many years of toxic burden before we maybe made the changes, or we're exposed to things that we have no control over. So you can talk about that in terms of how do we care for our liver, and why is that important?
Sure. So I will draw attention to chapter 5 of my book here, where chapter 5 is all about tackling the laundry. So in chapter 5, I'm comparing.
Oh, I love that. Cleaning the laundry. That's awesome. That's perfect for the liver. I never would have made that analogy, but that's amazing.
That was an easy one to make. Some of them were more of a stretch, but for the most part, that was.
I love it.
So we constantly in our homes have an incoming burden of laundry, right? That we're washing, drying, folding, putting away, but it doesn't end. It's constant that we're dealing with our laundry, and we may realize that for our homes, but then just not necessarily think with our bodies it's the same thing. But it is. Driving to work, you roll down your windows, you're exposed to auto exhaust, or to at least living in Iowa, herbicides and pesticides in the corn, and probably mold, floating around as well. So we're constantly exposed. So we need to really be aware of that. I think just having the awareness is step 1. But in my book, I talk about all kinds of ways to reduce our toxic load. So my favorite way is through use of a far infrared sauna. We have a sauna here at the clinic that we allow patients to use. And that's something that I've definitely used aggressively in the past. I think that's one of the most effective means for getting rid of heavy metals and chemicals, whatnot. And that's something we can test patients for too. I have a lot of farmers with high levels of glyphosate, various chemicals in their body from their chronic exposure. Well, the sauna company that we use actually has trials showing, in sweat analyses, what's coming out. We can see heavy metals. We can see these bad things, these toxins coming out.
Do you mind if I ask what brand that is?
I use High Tech Health.
High Tech Health, okay.
Yep.
Do they have in-home, like solo saunas?
Well, yeah, this one is small enough. We had one in our home for a while. We have it.
Okay.
We've kind of taken it back and forth when we were moving locations to have enough room and whatnot. But yeah, I actually learned at the conference I keep referring to. Conferences are great. You learn so much.
They are. Which conference was it?
So I actually spoke at Dr. Terry Wall's, the Wall's Protocol Conference.
That's amazing.
Also,
so I was just at the Mindshare conference, and I ran into her in the bathroom.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, it's Terry Walls.
She's great. She's very inspiring. I was supposed to go to Mindshare, but I'm pregnant and I didn't want to fly, and so I canceled my ticket. But next year.
Next year. That'll be amazing.
What was I talking about at the conference? So many of the patients with autoimmune diseases there had heat sensitivity, and so there was a new company who had, it was dry sauna, but they were basically just lights, and I don't remember the name of the company, but for patients who can't tolerate the heat, this was a new option for them too, which I found fascinating, and I want to learn more about that. But currently at our practice, we have high-tech health sauna, and so patients can build up in temperature. So they can start at 100 or 110 degrees and work up to 20, 30, 40, and work up with length of time. Because you don't want to get dehydrated, you don't want to pass out, and if you're really toxic, you may not last long in there. Your body may not feel so well as it's detoxing.
Question with that, do people ever take binders before using a sauna?
So I know that's not in my, like protocol, but you certainly could. I think generally speaking, most of my patients, I'm recommending they have some sort of like protein or fiber powder every day. And so that should help to bind some of the toxins, but I don't say like take activated charcoal before you get in the sauna or anything like that. That hasn't been a routine of mine. Now, if patients have like mold toxicity, we're going to more aggressively use the binders, but for sauna use, usually no, just proper hydration. But so sauna is my favorite. We do have, do you want me to talk about supplements a little bit, or?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So we use various different supplement companies, and one of which has, I think, a pretty synergistic blend of choleretics and cholagogues, which are fancy words for, just nutrients that help your liver and gallbladder purge out or express out toxins. So we're talking about milk thistle, artichoke, dandelion, beet, I'm forgetting the fifth, but basically, those work very well together. But when I do give those, then I make sure the patient is taking some sort of, powder, some sort of binder, because if we're going to provoke the body to dump out toxins, we don't want them to get recirculated. We want them to get bound and then pooped out, essentially. So we have a little liver detox program, couple-week program that oftentimes we'll put our patients through. And kind of like, again, changing your furnace filters quarterly. This is not something you do for your body once. This is something you should do a couple times per year, if not quarterly. And that also means taking a break from caffeine and alcohol. That's important also. Just like we were talking about giving your mind a rest from stress, we need to give your liver a rest from stress also. So stopping the alcohol, the caffeine, and eating very clean and organic, and taking the binder, we'll call it a binder, as well as the liver detox pills, can be very effective at helping patients start to get rid of that burden. And some patients need to do it a lot longer, but 2 weeks is a good start.
I'm glad that you mentioned caffeine too, because I sort of cyclically go on and off of coffee. And there's long periods of time where I don't drink it, or I drink a little bit of decaf because I really want, that warm coffee smell in the morning and things like that. And then there will be periods where I drink it and I don't really notice any negative physical effects, and so I do think that's really important to be able to either intentionally, because you're intentionally trying to help your liver, or just listening to your body and being like, well, it's starting to respond a little too much to the caffeine. I'm getting some heart palpitations. Maybe that's overburdening my liver a little bit. I need to calm down. And then other times you're like, I just burned right through. It's no problem. So I must be pretty good. But learning, just even learning how to listen to your body and notice that little bit of difference. And that can be different based on where you are in your cycle even. So, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think sometimes the concept of getting off caffeine is a difficult one. But if you learn how to cycle it, and you learn that you'll be okay when you're off of it for a little while, and then you're able to get in tune more with where you actually are in terms of your body being able to create energy, and what level you're at. And if you're not able to function without caffeine, then it's probably a good sign.
It's a problem.
You should go off of it for 2 months or so. Give your liver a little bit of love, and do some stress relief and all that fun stuff. So I'm glad you mentioned that. But yeah, the sauna, I'm starting to look into that. I would love to have one in my home, and just, you can meditate while you're in the sauna. And boom.
You totally can. And that's one of the things, back to the caffeine, that I did also at the beginning of our conversation. You kind of asked, what else did I do lifestyle wise? I used to go to Starbucks and get a double shot of espresso, and that was with the nasty artificial sweeteners and gross. I haven't touched caffeine in probably 5 or 6 years.
And you probably have more energy now than you did when you were,
Mm-hmm.
than from the caffeine buzz. Yeah.
And people think, oh, I'll never be able to go off caffeine, but you have caffeine and you feel great, and then you crash. So you then have more, and then you crash. So it's just more level. I just feel physically, emotionally, just more level without caffeine. But again, my body was already in overdrive. I didn't need any more stimulation, and caffeine, would push me over the edge. So that's something that I learned rather quickly to get out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, so many people will think, oh, I'm not tired. I don't need rest. I'm not actually stressed out, but that's because they're grabbing the sugar or the caffeine 3 times a day or whatever it is as a stimulant. So if you take that out and you really listen and see how your body responds, you'll learn really quickly, like, what's actually happening there. That's a good test for people. Everybody, that's your homework this week. Take out the caffeine, see what happens, be brave, give it 3 days, and you'll have a good baseline of what to work on. That's for sure. So you talked a little bit about supplementation. In the book, you also mentioned that you use bioidentical hormone therapies. So can you talk about the difference between, the typical hormones that a doctor may prescribe versus what like synthetic versus bioidentical, and how your body would respond better to one or the other?
Sure. So with hormone replacement therapy, I'll preface this, obviously in the younger population, we want to do everything we can, reducing stress, reducing toxin exposure, fixing nutritional deficiencies to get those ovaries producing more hormones, and minimizing stress on the adrenals, which are your B team. If your ovaries aren't helping, your B team's kind of your adrenals. So you want both of those organ systems to be able to help. Now, some women have had hysterectomies. So if they don't have the ovaries, they're not making the hormones. And if they're stressed and their B team their adrenals aren't helping, I don't say they're screwed, but then we get to the point where, to get them feeling better sooner, we'll give hormone replacement therapy. So I reserve hormone replacement therapy for patients who need it, obviously, and that's based on symptoms and then labs. But anytime we talk about hormones, the cancer word comes up. So we'll kind of differentiate the natural versus the synthetic. So in the Women's Health Initiative study, several women were given Premarin, which is pregnant mare's urine, orally. So it was oral estrogen, primarily estrone. And that study did show increased risk of cancers and clots and things that, they decided to, stop the study for. And so I try to not replicate what was done in that study in my practice. So I don't give oral estrogen. I don't give horse's urine. What that boils down to is the chemical structure. And I have in my book in chapter 6, I compare the chemical structure of the synthetic hormones, something like horse urine, right, to a hormone that could be compounded by a compounding pharmacy. So when you think of, even we could compare this back to, toxins on foods, whatnot. Our body doesn't want to consume foods loaded with toxins. They're difficult for our body to detoxify from. It's just harder on our liver, whatnot. The same is true with the hormones. So if we think of the molecular structure being synthetic, one, it's more difficult for our body to just get rid of, but two, it's not going to bind like a key fitting in a keyhole. That hormone fitting into that hormone receptor isn't going to fit appropriately because the molecular structure is just so different. If we think of bioidentical hormones, which is what I do use in my practice, a more natural hormone replacement therapy, those are usually plant-based, usually from yam. So many of the hormones I use have 2 ingredients, stearic acid and yam. I mean, they're very, very simple. And that molecular structure is biologically identical to the hormones that we're supposed to be making. And thus those hormones should fit like a key fitting in a keyhole, fitting in that hormone receptor appropriately. When it fits appropriately, the patient's going to have fewer side effects also. So they're much safer, and we cannot compare the risks of the synthetics to the natural at all. A lot of providers try to do that, and it's just like comparing apples to oranges. We can't compare them. So I try to give my patients what I feel are the safest forms, which are the bioidenticals, and then we use the safest routes of absorption. So progesterone is safe in a pill, but estrogen and testosterone aren't, so we don't give hormones in that same fashion. We could do a topical gel or cream. We could do a little troche or lozenge under the tongue, that only in a very low dose, that only a small amount is the patient actually going to swallow. Or I also offer pellet therapy here. So pellets look like little grains of rice that we actually put under the fatty tissue after we numb the patient up in the lower back, upper bottom area. So there are several ways to take hormones, and we just select the most appropriate route for the patient.
Okay. So you say you really, that's sort of last resort for people that really, really need it. Now, is
Yep.
there ever a situation where, because they're so symptomatic, that you would place someone on hormone replacement therapy, the work on the lifestyle, and eventually they can sort of come off of it as their body responds to less of a toxic load, less stress, better
Yeah.
lifestyle, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So I wish all my patients came in with, just 100% motivation and they wanted to change everything on day one. But realistically, I have some patients who are never going to change their diet, who are never
Hmm.
going to reduce their stress, who are never, whatever it is that we're advising them on, they may not make those changes. And so even in the younger population, yes, I mean, I will still give hormone replacement therapy, but I preface that by saying, what my recommendation is, but they may not necessarily buy into the lifestyle modifications. Now, if they do, and we can get their body producing more hormones, you bet then we'll wean them off the therapy. But it's very case by case because it's determined by how motivated the patient is, whatnot.
Sure, and everybody's different. Everybody's lifestyle is different, so I'm sure that's hard. So you mentioned earlier that you wish everyone would start getting testing in their 20s and 30s. So if someone doesn't necessarily notice any dramatic issues or symptoms, but you still think maybe they should just get tested, would that be annually or every other year? What would you recommend for someone just wanting to prevent hormone decline?
Sure. Good question. I don't know that I'd say every year is necessary per se. If the patient's feeling great, they probably could go 2, 3, 4 years, just like how they recommend PAPs every 3 years. Not a ton is probably going to change in those few years. But I would say, gosh, if someone could do maybe when they're getting hormones tested when they're 20 and then 25 and then 30, and then maybe starting in the 30s, do it every 3 years or a little more frequently. And then in the 40s, maybe then start going to every year because we really want to capture those subtle declines. That would be ideal.
Yeah, and that's probably fairly easy, I would imagine. I think I read in the book that you do offer the Dutch test, right, which is a urine test.
Yep.
So that's like
Yep.
something people could even do in home
Mhm.
and make it incredibly easy.
That's a really convenient test to do, especially if you don't like getting your blood drawn. It's a urine test. So
Yeah. Right, right. Well, you got to keep it easy for some people. Do you ever work with people long distance, or is it always in clinic?
oh yeah, absolutely. We see patients from all over. So we do virtual appointments. You bet.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, can you share with everybody where they can find you, how they can buy your book, where to find you on social media and connect with you?
Sure. So where's my book here? So you can find my book, Your Longevity Blueprint, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, really anywhere books are sold. We will offer your audience 10% off if they use the code THANKS TinyFitDiva. If they go to yourlongevityblueprint.com, they can use that code for a discount. Also, we have all the products listed in the book. Products are on the website. My blogs are there also. My clinic website is ihhclinic.com. So my practice is Integrative Health and Hormone Clinic in Hiawatha, Iowa. I'm on Facebook and on Instagram, so I'd love it if you go to our website. You can always click to find the social media links there. So if you want that PDF on the top tips to boost your hormones naturally, if you subscribe to the email list, you'll get that immediately also.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephanie. I'm so glad that you're on today. And it's just so nice to be able to talk to someone that can really just break it down in terms that are easy to understand and give people application like tips that they can apply today and
Yes.
little things that they can put in the back of their mind as they start to think about their hormones a little bit more and start to try to get healthier as they age. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today.
You're welcome. It helped me, and I'm hoping that's the intent behind the book, that it'll give viewers and the audience just hope. There are answers. They just have to do the digging, and hopefully the book will provide a lot of those solutions.
Absolutely.